Welcome to Storytime from DLR Libraries. My name is Katrina and today's story is from the O'Brien Book of Irish Fairy Tales and Legends, written by Una Levy, illustrated by Susan Field, and we thank O'Brien Press for permission to read from this book. Today's story is called The King's Secret, and it's about a barber Éanna, his mother, and his friend Shane and their king Laoghaire-Rathdown. Larry has a secret which he finds very embarrassing, and he goes to great lengths to keep it, well, secret. And we find out what happens when the barber Éanna discovers Larry's secret and what this means for Éanna, his mother, and their king. So shall we begin? The King's Secret. There were once two friends named Shane and Éanna. They lived in a village at the foot of the Ox Mountains. Shane was a harper at the King's Fort, while Éanna was a barber and cut people's hair. The king lived in a nearby valley. Laoghaire-Rathdown was his name, and everyone admired him, for he was handsome and brave. He was kind to his people, helping anyone in need, but something was wrong. The king had a strange secret. Oh, the poor king. Why does he always keep his head covered? People asked. Even when he's swimming, he keeps a linen cap. And that's not the worst bit, they whispered. It must be a dreadful secret, for every time he gets his hair cut, the barber is put to death. Who will be next to cut the king's hair, worried the barbers, for there were very few of them left. Now Éanna's mother was a widow. She was always afraid that the king would send for her son. You must go away from here, she told him. How many barbers have already been killed? The king will surely hear of you, and next time it could be your turn. I'll never leave here, Éanna said. He looked out at the clouds that shadowed the mountains. My father was born here, and his father before him. Not even the king is going to force me away. But not long after, the dreaded message came. A servant rode up to the barber shop door. King Laoghaire-Rathdown orders you to his fort tomorrow at noon. What will I do? Cried Éanna to Shane. If I cut his hair I will surely die, and what will my poor mother do then? The king is expecting the Princess Aisling to visit him soon, said Shane. That's why he wants his hair cut. If only we knew what to do. But though they plotted and schemed, they could not think of a plan. You must go away in the night, said Éanna's mother when she heard. Dress up in my old clothes. People will think you're a poor woman of the roads. I will not run away, Éanna said. I'll go to the fort and face the king. Wasn't he very brave? Next day Éanna set out on his journey. He wore his best clothes and his only pair of boots. His scissors, polished and sharpened, were strapped in a little case. At doors and windows faces whispered and stared. One or two called out, Good luck, Éanna, but most of them thought, Poor fellow, we'll never see him again. At the fort, Éanna was shown into a room. In spite of his fear, he just stared and stared. Such colours, such carvings, such hangings and antlers and rugs. The king came in. He nodded to Éanna, then sat in his royal chair at the throne. Begin, he said, and he reached up to take off his big crown. What was that huffle and scuffle outside? The door crashed open and Éanna's mother came tumbling in. I'm sorry, O king, said the guard. The woman pushed right past me. She demanded to see you. I'll put her out at once. The king frowned, but the woman threw herself at his feet. Your Majesty, she said, I am a poor widow, and this barber you sent for is my only son. I beg you, please do not kill him. If he dies, it will kill me as well. So there's Éanna's mother and the king and Éanna, all at the palace. King Laoghaire-Rathdown looked down at the old grey head. Something stirred inside him, for he really was a kind man. Very well, he said at last, I will not have him killed, but he must promise not to tell anyone what he will see in this room. I promise, gasped Éanna. See what happens next. When Éanna came home, his mother asked no questions. She gave him a plate of boxty, that's a potato pancake, and a mug of buttermilk. In the evening Shane called and the friends went fishing as usual in Laoghaire-Rathdown. Word soon spread among the neighbourhood that Éanna was alive and well. Next morning the little barber shop was packed to the door. So there's the barber shop packed to the door and the queues outside. They're all very nosy, aren't they? Suddenly everybody wanted a haircut, including some who had no hair at all. But Éanna kept his mouth shut. Snip, snip, snip went the scissors, and that was all anybody heard. Time passed, and Éanna found the secret harder and harder to keep. It's very hard sometimes to keep a secret. Day after day he thought about it, until he could think of nothing else. He closed his shop early and opened late. One day he didn't open it at all, poor Éanna, and though customers called, there was only his mother to be seen. "Éanna's not well," she said. "Please come some other time." It was true. Now Éanna could neither eat nor sleep. He grew pale and thin. His mother was half crazy with worrying. "See," she said, "I've baked fresh bread, and here's honey from the mountain bees. Eat now and soon you'll be well again." But he could not touch the food. At night he shivered in bed. He saw each star that came and every wisp of cloud crossing the moon. His mother sang to him, but it was no use. Soon he could not leave the house. He sat watching the sparks on the hearth and looked into the flames. The king's secret haunted him. Shane missed his friend. There were no more rambles to the mountains, no more seeking for trout in Laoghaire-Rathdown. Something will have to be done, he thought. So Shane went to see the Druid, a wise man who lived in the distant woods. "I cannot help him," said the Druid to Shane. "He must tell his secret to someone, then he'd be well again." We'll see what happens next. "But he promised the king," Shane groaned. "Well," said the Druid, "there's only one thing to be done. Send him to the stream near the king's fort. There is a willow tree leaning over the water with reeds growing in its shade. If he tells the secret to the reeds, all will be well." Shane hurried back with the Druid's advice. At once Éanna went to the stream. He knelt on the mossy stones, and under the willow tree he whispered his secret to the reeds. We'll see what happens now. "King Laoghaire-Rathdown has horse's ears." At once a great weight lifted from him. He went home and opened up his little shop. When evening came he ate 4 duck's eggs for supper, and he was fast asleep before his mother could quench the lamp. That night a soft wind blew from the west. In the stream the reeds bent and swayed. They began to murmur to one another. The wind listened and whistled in the willow tree. "Laoghaire-Rathdown's horse's ears, Laoghaire-Rathdown's horse's ears." Soon the whole wood was whispering with the news. "Laoghaire-Rathdown's horse's ears, Laoghaire-Rathdown's horse's ears." Oh my goodness, go for a dee in Erin Gallair. A few days later the king awoke early. A messenger was galloping up to the fort gates. "The Princess Aisling is coming today." King Laoghaire-Rathdown jumped from his bed. There was much to do. All morning the palace was in a scurry. A great fire was lit in the kitchen. Pigs roasted, cakes baked, servants hurried back and forth. The king sent for Shane. "Tonight you must play your harp, your best and merriest. I'm going to ask the Princess Aisling to marry me, and nothing must go wrong." So it was very important. Shane went and took out his harp. He examined it carefully, turning it this way and that. He was not satisfied, so there's Shane with his harp. He went to look for wood. There was a willow tree leaning over the stream with reeds growing in its shade. "Just what I need," said Shane, sawing off a branch. All afternoon he worked shaping and carving the smooth, beautiful wood. At last the harp was fixed. Carefully he put in the strings, but there was no time to test it. Prince Aisling was already at the gates. A great feast was prepared. The king led Princess Aisling to her place. "How handsome he is," she thought, "but I have heard such strange tales. Some say he is kind, and others that he is evil and cruel. There's some secret or mystery about it. Oh, I wish I knew." So there's King Laoghaire and Princess Aisling. The king could not stop looking at the princess. Such beautiful eyes, such wonderful hair. But she seemed worried and sad. She sat pushing her food around her plate. "Bring on the harper," cried the king. "Let's have a little merriment." Shane took up his harp, but instead of music, there was a rustling wind. It swept around the great hall and rose to the smoky roof. Guess what it said? "Laoghaire-Rathdown's horse's ears, Laoghaire-Rathdown's horse's ears." Oh my God! Horrified, Shane muffled the harp, but it was too late. Nobody stirred, nobody spoke. The only sound was the great log fire spluttering in the grate. Princess Aisling's cheeks grew pink. She gave a tiny snort, then a little chuckle, then a great big laugh. She laughed and laughed. All at once, what a relief! The whole court burst out laughing. "Ha ha 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 ha," they bellowed. "Laoghaire-Rathdown's horse's ears, Laoghaire-Rathdown's horse's ears." The king grew red. What a silly secret, he thought to himself, and what a silly fool I am. It doesn't matter, nobody cares. Then taking off his crown, he showed them all his ears, and that was the end of the secret. That was that. The king was never again ashamed of his ears. Shane got 3 kisses from the Princess Aisling, and Dana cut the king's hair for the royal wedding, and they all lived happily ever after. I hope you enjoyed that story from O'Brien Press. Join us again soon for more stories from DLR Libraries.